Okay, hello. I am here today with Moné Holder. She is the Senior Director of Advocacy and Programs for an organization called Florida Rising. Monet, hi, how are you?
Hi, Luna Box. I am well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. So, I think Florida Rising, you'll probably explain it better than I can. So, what exactly are they? What do they do? All those
Sure.
things.
We are an
Remember the hole in the door?
independent organization working to build voting and political power in marginalized communities across the state of Florida. So we work amongst different issue areas: criminal systems reform, gender justice or reproductive justice, voting rights, housing, and climate justice. And we do work year round, civic engagement, voter registration. And then we also do legislative work, so policies and working with the legislature around issues that impact our communities. And then during electoral cycles, we have a PAC where we endorse candidates who are running for office and run an independent expenditure operation to help those candidates hopefully get elected, and they're candidates who we think would be best for marginalized communities. So we do a lot of work in the state and really pay attention to issues that deeply impact everyone.
Yeah, and it's in Florida you do most of your work, right? Is that mostly a
Correct.
state focused thing? Yeah, it's like a grassroots. Yeah. Okay. So uh Florida currently is governed by Ron DeSantis, right? So
Yes, our
being a
governor.
progressive advocate in Florida with him in charge, uh you must be fighting against the tide there.
Yes, that is the short answer. And it's a tough fight. The governor has a lot of power here in the state, and as we do work every legislative session and try to advocate and talk to our legislative body about policies that they should have in place or policies that they shouldn't be putting forth, they we find that they are beholden to the governor. We're in a supermajority. So the Republican Party is in the party in charge here in the state. So it's a hard fight for progressives, hard fight for grassroots organizations to really get anything done. But on the flip side, we know that all politics are local. So we encourage our members in our community to also look at, their local city councils, commissions, or school boards to get change that they can see every single day to impact their communities while we fight the good fight at the state level.
Yeah, I think that's a discussion that doesn't really come up very often because I'd imagine if you mostly just watch national news or discussions around national politics, you would probably look at Florida and think that that's just a written off place because DeSantis is probably one of the more, not only one of the more right wing Republicans in general, but also one of the more successful ones, right? As far as pushing through his anti lockdown measures and probably one of the most aggressive when it comes to anti trans stuff and anti LGBT stuff. Um, so I guess maybe as an alternative message, there is still also the fact that local politics, even in a situation like that, might still yield a lot more potential than the average person might think. So, what would be an example of something that Florida Rising have been involved in recently at the state level?
Yeah, so and I'll give you one example. I'll give you first is how there's a stark difference when in state and local politics. So think about redistricting, right? Which happens every decade and impacts the funding, the schools, the grocery stores that communities get based on the way district lines are drawn. And you have the issues of packing or cracking or putting a large number of one demographic into one area to dilute their voting power. So at the state level, we pretty much were hit hard by redistricting. DeSantis had his plan. He totally took over the process, drew his own maps, and did what we call bullied the legislature in voting in favor of it ultimately. And we've sued and won and then lost on appeal. But in Jacksonville, Florida, where I'm based, North Florida, we actually got a win around redistricting. So we saw some gerrymandering happening at the local level, and we inserted ourselves into the redistricting process. We weren't heard by city council, and ultimately Florida Rising and a bunch of other grassroots organizations and individual plaintiffs sued the city of Jacksonville, and we won. Not only did we win, but they took up maps that we as the plaintiffs drew to, bring fair representation into the city. And also we gained an additional city council district. So that is like an example of what I mean, that if we don't win at the state level on an
Mhm.
issue, there's opportunities at the local level if we just, stay the course.
Yeah, that's a very specific example. That's cool. What do you said DeSantis bullied the legislature into taking his maps. How did that work? What happened there? I didn't know that story.
So, so there were a set of maps that were passed that weren't great, but were a little bit better. DeSantis then push the legislature to not vote in favor of them because he ultimately has veto power. He also has the power to not only veto things that are passed by legislators on the other side of the aisle, but not allow his counterparts in the GOP to move things that ultimately determine if they'll be reelected in their district. So he created a climate in which he, used his power not only to persuade his colleagues to not vote for a map that was better for the state of Florida, but to draw his own, and to also create a climate in which folks were scared to, vote against his map in fear of, retaliation as far as it looks like their bills and their priorities for their districts. So, some of it was pretty blatant, some of it was behind closed doors, but ultimately everyone knew that it was, DeSantis who controlled the redistricting process here in the state of Florida.
Yeah, I always hear about because the way we do things in the UK is very different. So gerrymandering is always a bit of a kind of like voodoo science when I hear about it in the United States. Um, what is pushing against that? Because I think for Florida Rising, isn't it the case that just like any interested young activist can just join and start contributing, right? Um,
Yeah,
what does a movement like that, like even just like fighting against that, like almost like a legal battle, you said in Jacksonville over redistricting, what does that look like for just a regular activist who joins up? Like, what would that involve? Because I think that's another kind of blind spot I think people have is they want to get involved in like activism, but they don't really know what they'd be doing, you know? I feel like canvassing is very easy to explain, but what you said might be different, right?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So we have different entry points to being a part of the movement or part of an organization. So we have our formal or official dues paying members, and it's a membership fee of $25 per year. And with that, you get invited to all of our meetings. You go to Tallahassee with us for our advocacy day, all expense paid. And we just have different trainings and leadership development opportunities that our membership base either it has exclusive access to or first dibs as a member to be involved. But on the flip side of that, money is never an issue. So if you want to still become a member, you can, volunteer, whether that is canvassing, making phone calls, sending text messages around issues that specifically matter to you or that may matter to someone that you care about. So as we closely monitor not only state legislature, what's happening locally, issues that are in the community, those are opportunities for us to engage folks and have them engage the people who are in charge. Outside of just, folks in the legislature or city council, we talk to supervisors of elections because in Florida, we have 67 counties and what we call supervisors of elections who administer or in charge of how elections run in their county. One issue with that, I would say, is that it's not uniform. So you may go to one county and
Mhm.
have 14 early voting days in another county and have 7, or one may have ballots translated and one may not. So it takes a level of advocacy, going to your supervisor, saying what your community needs. That's an opportunity in which members or volunteers can go with us and speak from a grassroots perspective on what matters and what they want to see. So we definitely set up the playing field for people to get involved, providing you with tablets or phones or virtual access, giving you talking points, preparing you on the issue so that way you are on the front lines, but we are just pretty much providing support and letting people know how they can make change. So activism looks like how you want it. Some people may just want to show up in solidarity to a rally or an event. We
Mhm.
train our members to speak. I'm not going to be the only person to talk about, what's happening. It's really our members. So those are just different ways, and it all depends on what's happening and what the climate looks like and what strategy we think will be best. But we always involve community in it at all points. And then when you talk about like litigation, for example, oftentimes, we need our members and folks from the community to speak about their lived experiences. That's how you're able to have compelling arguments. That's how you're able to show in court that this is something that detrimentally impacts a population. So our members being involved in that and willing to tell their stories is also something that's very important.
Yeah, I've heard stories about this where I don't think it happens that often in the way that I've heard this one told, but it's that it can sometimes be the case where someone might go to a hearing and it might be about like trans legislation or something, and they'll just stand up and they'll say, "I'm trans. This is how this legislation will affect my life," and
Yeah.
then they'll come back like a month later and they'll say, "Oh, there are actually like." 3 or 4 Republicans in that house who changed their votes because they probably just never met a trans person before, right? Yeah, yeah, that definitely. So it does sound like you've got a lot of things in place to have it that people don't really feel like they're out of their depth when they join, right? Like it's quite, yeah. Um, what kind of campaigns do you have looking forward to in the future?
So this year, the presidential election is a big one.
That one for
As
one,
I
yeah.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we endorse candidates and we also work on ballot initiatives. So this year, not only are we worried about top of the ticket, we have what we call down ballot races. So in certain places, you have people running for House seats, you have people running for commissions or city councils, depending on where they live in the state. And then abortion access is one that we're hoping to see on the ballot in November. We meaning Florida Rising, is part of Floridians Protecting Freedom, which is the coalition that spearheaded putting what is now Amendment 4 on the ballot. So we got over 1.5 million signatures from people across the state saying that they want the access or the right to have access to abortion on the ballot in November. Right now, we are waiting for the Supreme Court, who reviews the language, to confirm that it is constitutional and that it can be on the ballot. And we actually have an April 1st deadline, so that decision can drop any day. And once it does, because we're hopeful and we're confident in that we will kick into full gear on educating every Floridian in the state of Florida what it means to have access to abortion, what it means to have that decision be a private decision between you, your family, and your healthcare provider, and not a politician, and what it means to vote yes when they see it on the ballot in November. So that's the huge, huge, huge campaign. We're part of the petition collection access. We're on the executive committee. I served as founding chair of Floridians Protecting Freedom for several months. So that is one that we are all hands on deck on, in addition to making sure people vote up and down the ballot for candidates that really have their best interest at heart.
Okay, cool. So definitely going to be a busy year for you guys. Um,
Yes.
I having a glance at your website and looking through the particular issues, I feel like it's probably quite safe to say that you guys are generally to the left of the mainstream Democrat Party. Would that be fair? Yeah.
Oh, I think that is accurate.
Yeah. Okay. Um, What's your experience? Because it's probably very different from mine in the online space, but what's your experience in dealing with further left like apathy or people who just don't want to vote?
Yeah. Um, so it varies. It varies in a lot of things. Definitely people's lived experiences and where people currently are, demographics, especially as it relates to age. And when you think about race and gender and and then digging into you know, being Black is not monolithic. So you have your Caribbean and immigrant communities, and all of those folks have different issues and things that they care about that they want to hear and speak to. And that doesn't always look completely far left, and doesn't always, so some people are more moderate, conservative, have a centrist approach. So we pride ourselves as a nonpartisan organization by definition to be able to speak to everyone because we can find common ground with everybody about something that they care about or a change that they want to see that they can take action on. So it's really listening. A lot of our work with grassroots is having conversations, is meeting people where they are, finding out what they care about, what they want to know about, and providing that access because it's about democracy. So I hope that answered your question a little bit. I can go on and on
Yeah,
about
it sounds very different from I guess my more instinctive way to do it, because I guess it's like the nature of how I approach things like that is if someone says don't vote, like they're all the same and all that, I'll tend to just kind of berate them. Or um, more like in a nicer way would be just like explaining why there's such a big difference between a Democrat administration and a Republican, especially with Trump. Um, but sometimes it does feel like you're saying all these things like, well, here's what the Democrats did with regards to education. Here's the states where Democrats have been successful when it comes to abortion, or here's what's happened when they're more successful with trans rights and all these things. But or even I could just say with the current thing, like here's the big differences between Biden and Trump on Palestine. I think they're bigger than some people made them out to be. But they hear all that, but they're like, well, I don't really feel any different. So yeah, I feel like definitely the personal experience thing is worth. Yeah, it definitely sounds like a much more productive approach than
it's
what
worth
the
digging
impulse is.
into.
Yeah.
And it also helps people clearly see the difference between an organization like Florida Rising and someone who's just running for office and is telling you what you want to hear to get your vote, right?
Hmm.
So uniquely about us, I've been with the organization for 13 years, so it's been around maybe about 15. People are always asking, oh, so what do you guys do when it's not election time? And we're like, we're still working to change community, right? They're not used to someone coming to them about voting who actually care or actually will be around when the elections are over to still, help them. So that's where we're different. And I think focusing on that aspect of our work and like I said, really fun because most people are really driven by issues and not more so a person or a candidate. At least that's what we're finding now in these times, especially I think with younger voters as well.
I think I definitely noticed that in my brief canvassing experience in the United States, as everything from democracy was a very common one we heard like as a top issue, but then even when it went down to like parking. And, like I've never thought to prepare points about the difference between Democrats and Republicans on parking, but yeah. When we were connected to each other, I was sent a kind of like blurb about what you were kind of pushing for right now, and I think you said that one of Biden's big issues now is that he might be losing the youth vote over his positions on Palestine. What's do you want to give us a rough outline of where you're standing on that right now?
Yeah, I mean, I say that not just in theory, but like what I see across the state and the folks who are most energized around it are youth voters. And I want to first and foremost say what's happening in Gaza is a humanitarian crisis, right?
Hmm?
Um, we see that there's nearly 2.2 million people who are displaced. And as you think about the displacement of folks, and you dig deeper into who is being impacted the most, I think the idea of there being women and children is really pulling the heartstrings of a lot of people, but more so younger voters. As we relate in Florida, and we're having big conversations around reproductive issues, I know for a fact, I think close to 655,000 women in Gaza don't have access to feminine hygiene products and hospital care. Those are statistics, those are things that resonate with younger voters, with women, women of color, as, issues that we're facing here magnified somewhere else without any help or aid in sight. So it's real as we look at some of the protests and actions that are happening. Young people are leading the charge, and they're looking really for Biden to be a peacemaker in this instance. And I think once, if and when he's able to speak to that or come with some resolve that resonates and make folks feel like we're in the right direction, he's going to have a challenge. And I say I've been saying this along the course of the way, and for older folks too, not to offend anyone, when you think through some of the faith aspects and those who rely heavily on Christianity, to see our brothers and sisters, starving and going hungry or not being able to care for themselves and us not lending a hand, that also speaks to the values that people disconnect from if they don't see, this administration taking the right stand. I know I said a mouthful, but that's what I'm seeing and that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think when it comes to, because my own thoughts when it comes to Biden on that particular issue is that I know there's definitely a very growing rift between him and the Israeli government, right? So he's done things like he's put sanctions on a couple of settlers who were involved in riots last year. He's put sanctions on, I think, 2 settler outposts. He's fallen out with Netanyahu a few times. I think he called him an asshole off on a hot mic once. I think he his rhetoric has become very much in the direction of talking about ceasefires, at the very least temporary ones for humanitarian purposes. His major thing now is to talk about the humanitarian situation as opposed to a final assault on the last city in Gaza. I think Blinken is talking about reviewing a policy over whether or not the American government should recognize the state of Palestine, which I think when Jeremy Corbyn presented that a few years ago, I thought that was like massive. That was a very new thing for a Western politician like Britain and American to do. But now it seems it's being considered by Biden, like a center left Democrat, is kind of wacky to me. But then I also wonder if one side might say that's not far enough. I'd be inclined to agree with that too in some areas. But then I also wonder if he goes too far in the other direction, does he risk losing moderate voters who are obviously quite pro-Israel?
Yeah, and when you said not far enough, it's definitely that's something that I've heard. Not far enough and not soon enough,
Hmm.
right? So I think he has to decide where he stands and stick to it. I mean, anyone can respect someone who stands on values, or as they say, young folks say, who stands on business, right?
Hmm.
During these times, and people will respect it. And we've seen that with other candidates and other presidents. And they still manage to be successful in their races or their elections or re-elections. So I think we have to stand on, what it means to take action, what it means to help that brother, what acts of service means, what humanitarianism means, and have a clear definition and be firm on it. And, the American people will vote the way they will vote. So,
What are I was going to say 3 things, but maybe one's fine. What would you do if you were in Biden's position right now with regards to the war?
I mean, if I were him, I would have taken a stand a long time ago to um, cease fire, to send aid to help folks and not fuel a war and fuel genocide in any nation. So, that's me.
Is that ceasefire in the sense of like Israel just leaves Gaza, like they just stop and leave, or they try to negotiate a long-standing settlement with Hamas, or they try to replace Hamas with someone who's more up for negotiations in the future, or what would that mean?
I think it's a bit of both, and it's an immediate relief, and
Hmm.
it's also helping to ensure some long-term or permanent peace in Palestine.
Okay. I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us and introducing the audience to something a little bit new, I guess, when it comes to local politics. I think the Florida Rising website, I've got that up, so I can just put that in my chat. Um, is there So normally when I have people on for talks like this, I would ask them to say where people can find them, if they have like social media or if they have something that they want to plug or something that they want to direct people to, or do you have anything along those lines? Or
Sure, it's Moné _ Holder. It's
Mhm.
my social handle on Twitter and Instagram, and then Also, definitely the website, Florida Rising's website, is a way you can get involved if you're here in the US. It's a way you can support us by giving donations to any of our campaigns, particularly the ballot initiative or the work that we do year round. We're always looking for supporters. There's always work you can do remotely if you want to engage. And we just definitely appreciate all support. And I appreciate being here and on your platform today.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, I really appreciate your time, and it was nice talking to you. All right,
You as well.
all
See
right,
you later,
take
Love
care.
Bot.
Bye bye.